The word kutastat, meaning without change, is also very significant. There are two kinds of living entities, Nitya Mukta and Nitya Ada. A Nitya Mukta never forgets his position as the eternal servant of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. One who does not forget this position and knows that he is part and parcel of the Supreme Lord is Nitya Mukta. Such a Nitya Mukta living entity represents the Super Soul as his expansion. As stated in the Vedas, Nityo Nityanam. Thus, the Nitya Mukta living entity knows that he is an expansion of the Supreme Nitya, or the Eternal Supreme Personality of Godhead. Being in such a position, he sees the material world with a different vision. The living entity who is Nitya Bada, or eternally conditioned, sees the material varieties as being actually different from one another. In this connection, we should remember that the embodiment of the conditioned soul is considered to be like a dress. One may dress in different ways, but a really learned man does not take dresses into consideration. As stated in Bhagavad Gita 5:18, Vidya Vinaya Sampane Brahmane Gavihastini Nuni Chaiva Sapakecha Pandita Samadarshina. The humble sage, by virtue of true knowledge, sees with equal vision a learned and gentle brahmana, a cow, an elephant, a dog, and a dog-eater, outcast. Thus, a learned man does not look upon the dresses that externally cover the living entity, but sees the pure soul within the varieties of dress and knows very well that the varieties of dress are the creation of nescience, avidya rachitam. Being a Shakti-avesha avatar, empowered by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Prithu Maharaj did not change his spiritual position, and consequently, there was no possibility of his viewing the material world as reality. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnanjana Shalakaya Chakshurum Militam Yenam Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. This king is the master of the three worlds, and he is directly empowered by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He is without change, and he is an incarnation of the Supreme, known as Shakti-avesha Avatar. Being a liberated soul and completely learned, he sees all material varieties as meaningless because their basic principle is nescience. So would anyone like to share something that stood out for them from the verse or purport? Yes, that's going to be the theme. Spiritual vision. Anything else? Yeah. The what? The Nitya Mukta is an expansion of the Super Soul. I also thought that was really interesting. Yeah, at one point when I was reading, I was like trying to understand Shakti Avesha Avatar, the technicalities of it. It's a living entity that's empowered by Krishna. He's a jiva. But as it said in the purport, he's got all the qualities. And I was thinking of the Nectar of Devotion, where Rupa Goswami, lists qualities of Krishna, and then he gets up to 50 qualities, and then he says, this is what a living entity can actually also possess, not in full, like Krishna, not unlimited, but yeah. Okay, that's the position of Prithu Maharaj. But yeah, it's amazing that he's because he's completely aligned with Krishna, he's representing the super soul. Anything else? At the time of the world, he's empowered by supreme ruling power. Yes, yes, empowered by ruling power. Yes. That stood out, that Kotasta means unchanging. Yeah. Okay. So I was just recapping a little bit. Like you're saying, so Shaktivish Avatar is empowered for a specific purpose, and Pritu's mission is to protect the people of the world. So he's empowered as a king, and I thought it interesting. Recently, in some of Madhuryamita Swami's lectures, he was talking about Maharaj Prataparudra, also an ideal king in Chaitanya Lila, and he's saying that the king's position is to protect the people externally, from danger, invasion, whatever, drought, whatever external situations presents itself as a possible, negative outcome, but also protect internally. I thought that was interesting. So protect the citizens internally from lust, anger, greed, etc. And we see that, nowadays it's very different. Rulers in each country can't protect themselves. How are they going to protect others of these things, these internal demons? The chapter before this one, when King Pritu's appearance and coronation, I don't know if anyone's like me, but I really like hearing all the gifts that are presented to King Pritu. And do you remember any of the gifts? There's one that always stood out for me. I wrote two that I thought were pretty cool. The first one is an umbrella that constantly sprays fine particles of water. That was presented by Varuna, demigod. And this other one I didn't remember, and I thought would be cool to have. A protective garment made of spiritual knowledge. Imagine that. If you put on something and you're like, yeah, you can see through the eyes of Shastra, which is kind of the theme of this class, Chakshuta. And that was given by Lord Brahma to Prithu Maharaj. And sorry? What was the first? Mystic? What? Majestic slippers that he can go anywhere. Yeah. That's pretty cool too. And he shows his humility by discouraging the praise because he hasn't really done anything yet. And so now we're in this chapter where they're still continuing to praise him. And one of the praises earlier in verse 4 is saying that he's engaging the citizens in pursuit of religious principles, and that he'll chastise the irreligious and the atheistic. And Prabhupada makes the point that nowadays that's also not what's happening at all, because the governments themselves are atheistic in most cases, and they just exact taxes for their own sense enjoyment. And I was like, that's so true. I had the visit of my mother for the last month and a half, and she's very, like most people in Argentina, very immersed in the politics of the country. And I heard so much about it, even though she was trying to take a break from it, and how they're complete criminals, to the point that the ex-president, she was sentenced to 7 years in prison, and she's trying to get out of it by just buying everyone in the justice system. So yeah, so it's just outright criminals, and it's like in your face. They're not even hiding it. just stealing money for their own enjoyment. Yeah, so anyways, another praise in text 12 is that King Prithu, he's will be able to see all the internal and external activities of every one of his citizens. I thought that was interesting. Can't hide. Still, no one will be able to know his system of espionage, and he himself will remain neutral regarding all matters of glorification and vilification paid to him. I thought that was also kind of similar to the role of the super soul, the witness, but is also neutral. And then in the text 17, he'll respect all women as if they were his mother. And yesterday, my daughter was saying, "Why do they call you Mataji?" Like she was trying to understand the term. I was explaining, every man sees their wife, and then everyone else they see as their own mother, as a way of respect, and treat his own wife as the other half of his body. I thought that was cool as well. And he'll be an affectionate father to his citizens. Imagine having a ruler that's an affectionate father to his citizens. He's so nice. And he will treat himself as the most obedient servant of the devotee. I thought that was amazing. Who always preach the glories of the Lord. And in the purport, Prabhupada's talking about how the state should be serving the devotees and following their instructions, ideally. And then we come to text 19, where we hear about Nitya Mukta and Nitya Vada. Nitya Mukta, the devotee that never forgets that they're an eternal servant of Krishna, and that they see the material world without variety because the varieties are meaningless. So I was thinking about this because it's as if we, as devotees, should aspire to have two different visions. The spiritual vision, like it's saying here, that we see that all souls are equal, and then also understand, in order to function in this world, the different positions, like we were just saying, seeing women as Mataji, that. So it's like simultaneously we need to have those two visions so that we can deal with people properly and have the right etiquette, Vaishnava etiquette. And then in the purport, Prabhupada quotes the famous verse that I only know the last line, Pandita Samadarshina, where he's also saying that the sage can see everyone equally, because these dresses are actually created by illusion. They're not permanent. Basically, they don't last. So that's kind of like a bit of a breakdown of the purports. It's now getting into the class. So the last line of the purport says, being a Shaktavesha avatar, empowered by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Prithu Maharaj did not change his spiritual position, and consequently, there was no possibility of his viewing the material world as reality. So wouldn't it be amazing if we could always see like that, see things as they are, having that Shastra Chakshusha, seeing through the eyes of Shastra instead of seeing through the eyes of our present conditioning. I was thinking about how we see how when Kali Yuga is progressing, there'll be more and more conditioning, I guess. Humans are becoming more and more complicated in how they see reality. They've got a lot of issues from their childhood. I'll include myself. Everyone is coming with a lot of baggage, And it's actually, it's like a transformation of our vision when we start practicing Krishna consciousness. And yeah, society is also becoming much more unstable, so that's, you know, making it harder for people to have. They come with a lot more trauma and difficulty, and it's hard experiences, lots of suffering, and weird visions of themselves that make them suffer. Yeah, so by reading, we start purifying our intelligence and seeing a different reality. We start seeing things through Shastra, which is, we start seeing what this world is for, what we are meant to be doing, how we're supposed to relate to others. I was just remembering that some years ago when we were living in Gita Nagari with Jayadeva Kavi, Madhuryamita Swami, when he'd come and visit Gita Nagari, we'd have reading sessions in his cabin. And at one point he was talking about, this was like 5 years ago, there's a lot going on in America, like in terms of body consciousness and lots of like this and then that and that designation and a lot of problems in society. And so he was making the point that the more body consciousness is in society, the more suffering. And yeah, there's actually so much suffering due to not seeing reality, because our perception is key to happiness. Wouldn't you agree? And I was thinking how now people are becoming aware of that. There's so many studies of how, for example, gratitude helps our mental health, helps our physical health, because obviously the emotions we feel affect the different chemicals in our bodies. And so as devotees, in our year of, every year we get a chance to meditate on feeling grateful for our spiritual teachers, like when the Vyasa Puja ceremony comes around and we're like all kind of feeling that gratitude of all the mercy we've received, reflecting on that and appreciating. But I was just thinking, it doesn't really have to be only once a year. It can be like constant, regular practice of coming into that state of mind of being grateful to Krishna for bringing devotees into our lives. I was reading also how, you know, well, I think we'll read it later, but like the rare, how rare it is to actually take up Krishna consciousness in this universe and come into contact with devotees. So it's a very special thing. Okay. And that also helps us to see reality and not take for granted that we have this opportunity to serve Krishna. So at the end of this, this Leela is actually like 8 chapters long in Bhagavatam, so it's quite important. And I was trying to, I was reflecting on the last 3 verses of this chapter, of this pastime of Prithu Maharaj, and I thought I had several good points. So this is in chapter 23, verse 37. A pure devotee who is executing the different processes of devotional service may be situated in the transcendental position, being completely absorbed in Krishna consciousness. But even he, while discharging devotional service, must hear, read, and induce others to hear about the character and life of Prithu Maharaj. I think in that purport, I didn't write it down, but I think it's Prabhupada saying, like, you know, so many people are eager to hear about Radha and Krishna pastimes, but actually it's not different hearing about Krishna's devotees. And then the next verse, the great sage Maitreya continued, "My dear Vidura, I have as far as possible spoken the narrations about Prithu Maharaj, which enrich one's devotional attitude. Whoever takes advantage of these benefits also goes back home back to Godhead, like Maharaj Prithu. Then the purport, Prabhupada saying, the word Shravayit mentioned in a previous verse indicates that one should not only read for himself, but should also induce others to read and hear. That is called preaching. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu recommended this practice. Yare Deka Tarikaha Krishna Upadesha. Whomever you meet, simply talk with him about the instructions given by Krishna, or tell him of narrations of Krishna. Here it is. Prithu Maharaj's history of devotional service is as potent as narrations about the activities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. One should not make distinctions between the pastimes of the Lord and the activities of Prithu Maharaj. And whenever it is possible, a devotee should attempt to induce others to hear about Prithu Maharaj. One should not only read of his pastimes for one's own benefit, but should induce others to read and hear about them also. In this way, everyone can be benefited. And that reminded me of one of my favorite verses that I haven't thought about in a while, from Bhagavad Gita. Matchita Margata Prana Udayanta Parasparam Katayanta Samam Nityam Sushanti Charamantita. The thoughts of my pure devotees dwell in me. Their lives are fully devoted to my service, and they derive great satisfaction and bliss from always enlightening one another and conversing about me. I'm sorry if I read a lot, but I just think it's more powerful than my words. So here we go. Purport. Pure devotees, whose characteristics are mentioned here, engage themselves fully in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. Their minds cannot be diverted from the lotus feet of Krishna. Their talks are solely on the transcendental subjects. The symptoms of the pure devotees are described in this verse specifically. Devotees of the Supreme Lord are 24 hours daily engaged in glorifying the qualities and pastimes of the Supreme Lord. Their hearts and souls are constantly submerged in Krishna, and they take pleasure in discussing him with other devotees. So I feel like everyone should have at least one devotee they can discuss Krishna with fully, and relish that. It's usually the highlight of my day. And here, Prabhupada in this purport, he describes that beautiful analogy of the Bhakti Lata creeper that, here we go, let's read this better. There are innumerable living entities traveling throughout the different planets of the universe, and out of them, there are a few who are fortunate enough to meet a pure devotee and get the chance to understand devotional service. That's what I was referring to before about just feeling grateful. This devotional service is just like a seed, and if it is sown in the heart of a living entity, and if he goes on hearing and chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, that seed fructifies, just as the seed of a tree fructifies with regular watering. I like this part. The spiritual plant of devotional service gradually grows and grows until it penetrates the covering of the material universe and enters into the Brahma Jyoti, effulgence of the spiritual sky. In the spiritual sky also, that plant grows more and more until it reaches the highest planet, which is called Goloka Vrindavan, the supreme planet of Krishna. Ultimately, that plant takes shelter under the lotus feet of Krishna and rests there. It is explained there in Chaitanya Charitamrita that when the complete plant takes shelter under the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord, one becomes fully absorbed in love of God. Then he cannot live even for a moment without being in contact with the Supreme Lord, just as a fish cannot live without water. In such a state, the devotee actually attains the transcendental qualities in contact with the Supreme Lord. And that's the example we have here. And just the last part of this purport is meant there. The Srimad Bhagavatam is also full of such narrations about the relationship between the Supreme Lord and his devotees. Therefore, the Bhagavatam is very dear to the devotees. as stated in the Bhagavatam itself. Puranam Amalam Yad Vaishnavam Nam Priyam. In this narration, there is nothing about material activities, economic development, sense gratification, and liberation. Bhagavatam is the only narration in which the transcendental nature of the Lord and his devotees is fully described. Thus, the realized souls in Krishna consciousness take continual pleasure in hearing such transcendental literatures, just as a young boy and girl take pleasure in association. So it's equally beneficial to read about Krishna and to read about his devotees because they're both transcendental. A pure devotee, by definition, is Krishna conscious 24/7. So they're always connected to Krishna, always absorbed in loving service to Krishna. So when we hear about their activities, we become inspired to also engage in devotional service. And we also have examples to follow. And so in this verse that we're reading, we're encouraged to also develop this transcendental vision. And finally, the last verse of this Leela is nectar. Whoever with great reverence and adoration regularly reads, chants, and describes the history of Maharaj Prithu's activities will certainly increase unflinching faith and attraction for the lotus feet of the Lord. The Lord's lotus feet are the boat by which one can cross the ocean of nescience. I thought that was cool. It's the same term used in our present verse. And it's interesting because in the Purport Prabhupada saying that the devotee is actually doesn't have to cross the ocean because the devotees has already taken shelter of Krishna's lotus feet. So he's already where he's supposed to be. He doesn't need to cross anything. And I think that's the gist, that when one is Krishna conscious, one doesn't suffer material reality. I was hearing yesterday part of a lecture from Kadamba Swami, and as you may know, he's in a state where he's getting ready to leave his body, and he mentioned that yes, there's pain. He can make a list. We can make a list all the time of 10 things that are giving you suffering, and but you just don't get absorbed. They come, they go, just don't get absorbed. Your absorption is elsewhere. It's in Krishna. That's coming from someone that is living it. So by hearing and chanting of the glories of the Lord or the Lord's devotee, one can become firmly fixed in the service of the lotus feet of the Lord. This position can also be achieved very easily by narrating the history of the life of Prithu Maharaj regularly, every day. And I thought this was interesting. The word vimukta sangha is also significant in this connection. Because we associate with the three qualities of material nature, our position in this world is full of dangers. But when we engage in the devotional service of the Lord by the process of Shravanam and Kirtanam, we immediately become Vimukta Sangha, or liberated. So that's the key. Even though we're surrounded by dangers, if we're absorbed in Krishna, then we're beyond it. And I was also thinking about the point made in the verse about how liberated soul, like Prithu Maharaj, they see material variety as equal, and we see that also in Bhagavad Gita. Like the 6th chapter, where Krishna is saying to see pebbles and gold as the same. And I was thinking of that it's the same because they're not the pure devotees not wanting to enjoy them. In that sense, they're the same. But simultaneously, we have the example of Prabhupada, how he wouldn't even spend, well, he was careful with every little cent he spent, basically. He would, we hear that he had a diary or some kind of form of journal in the beginning, and he was writing every little cent that he would spend. So it's not that he would see, like, oh, money, whatever, just, he was very careful because it was Krishna's. So it's that simultaneousness of like seeing all material variety as equal, but at the same time using it properly in Krishna's service for Krishna's pleasure, and not wasting it. Not it's Lakshmi. It's respecting Krishna's energy. So I found this lecture by Prabhupada that he gave in 1971 in Delhi, and he's talking about very similar points. I wanted to share with you. The Papa Yoni, the pious man or impious man, that is consideration of this material world. So long we are in this material world, there must be this is good and this is bad. Although there is nothing good in this material world, everything is bad. But we have concocted some formulas that this is good and this is bad. Chaitanya Charitamrita, Krishnadas Kaviraj says, Dvaite Vajra Abhadra Sakali Samana in Antyalila 4:176. In the material world, Vajra Abhadra, anything Vajra and Abhadra, good and bad, they are simply mental concoction. There cannot be anything good. It's like, just like a man suffering from some disease, lying on the bed, a friend goes to him and asks him, my dear friend, how are you feeling today? He can say, yes, I'm feeling today all right. What is that all right? He's lying on the bed and he's taking medicine and so many discomfitures that are there. And still he says, I'm all right. So in the material world, this prosperity, so-called prosperity, is not prosperity, because the next life, I do not know what is going to happen. And the next life is there. Janma mrityu jara vidya dukkha dosha anudarshanam. Therefore, learned man, he sees always that my happiness, what is the value of this happiness? I'll have to die. I'll have to accept old age. I'll have to suffer from disease. As soon as I die, again, I will have to enter into the womb of a particular mother to take birth again. So where is the happiness? In the womb of a mother to live for 10 months in a very awkward position? We have forgotten. That is not very happiness. And here he's talking about the difference between the material and the spiritual vision. I don't know about you, I'm just finding this really interesting. Hopefully you are as well. The living entities, all the conditioned souls who have come here in this material world, their real purpose is how to enjoy this material world. They have no other purpose, because a living entity is not an enjoyer. He is a servitor. But when he wants to enjoy, he is sent into the material world. Krishna Bulia Jiva Boga Vanchakare. Because we are part and parcel of Krishna, our only duty is to serve Krishna. There's no other duty. Therefore, Krishna demands, Sarva Dhanam Parityaja Mamekam Sharanam Vraja. We have no other duty, just to serve Krishna. But when we forget our position, constitutional position, and we try to enjoy this material world, that is called materialistic way of life, or conditioned life. And then he quotes this famous verse from Madhuryamita Mataji, Anasaktasya Vishaya Yataham Pamunjata Nirbande Krishna Sambhave Yukta Vairagya Uchate, which we were kind of talking about a bit before. Yukta Vairagya. If we want to be aloof from the contamination of this material world, then everything, whatever we use, whatever we need, it must be in relation with Krishna. Then we can keep ourselves aloof from the contamination. That is the liberated condition. That means you are eternal servant of Krishna. If you always be engaged in the service of the Krishna, then you are above this material world, uncontaminated. But if you have got any material intention, then again you are under the clutches of Maya. We should always remember it. Powerful. And it reminds me of that verse of Bhagavad Gita about the lotus flower. I think it's in the 5th chapter. That's not touched by the mud. My mother was recently painting a backdrop for my deities. And I said, oh, I want there to be the river Yamuna and some lotuses. And she's like, oh, and I can put some on the grass. I'm like, no, the lotuses are in the water, but they're not touched by the mud. And it's like, you have to remember that analogy. We want to be, above the contamination of the material world, although we are in the water at the same time. And so I wanted to basically end with something I read yesterday with Baba Sandhi from Madhuryamita, because it's kind of putting together everything I was thinking about in this verse and what I've been reading about, the Bhakti Lata Bija, how we're trying to go to Krishna, and in the same way, Gopakumar is experiencing everything in the universe and in different, realities and different planets of the spiritual world, and we're reaching the point where he's getting closer and closer. Vrindavan. Right now, we just started the part 2, which is when Gopakumar approaches. He's just left Ayodhya, and now he's going to Dwarka. So he's oh yeah, and the reason why I also wanted to share this is because when we see the dealing between Krishna and his devotee, at least for myself, it increases my desire to go back to Godhead. So hopefully it does for you as well. So here you go. So for those of you that aren't familiar, Gopakumar has traveled everywhere and anywhere, and he's always dressed as a cowherd boy, and he's reaching Dwarka. And so cool because it's like in first person, so you kind of see it through his eyes. I then went to Dwarka and I saw various groups of Yadavas along with their children. They were accompanied by some Brahmanas of Mathura and were enjoying themselves. I had wandered everywhere, but never before had I seen such a perfection of charm as that which shone in them. Seeing them gave me such a delight that I forgot everything I had in my mind. And those Yadavas, the best of all knowing sages, drew me into their company and embraced me. When they recognized me as the son of a cowherd from Govardhan Hill, their hearts melted in a flood of affection. And they took me by the hand and brought me into the inner precincts of the city. From a distance, I saw the personality of Godhead brilliantly manifest, at leisure, in a vast assembly hall. He sat on the excellent cushion of an excellent throne made of gold and jewels. He was served by all the many quintessential charms of the Lord of Vaikuntha, and by many different splendors, greater and greater than even that Lord does not possess. Revealing his 2 beautiful arms for his devotees, Lord Krishna, the ocean of supremely wonderful pastimes, was worshipped by youthful maturity, softened by a touch of adolescent grace. His sublime gestures stole the hearts of his servants. Above him shone a broad white umbrella. At his sides waved a pair of excellent yak-tail fans, and in front of him, upon a golden footstool, sat his divine slippers. All around him were various symbols of royalty befitting the ruler of king among kings, and there were servants qualified to attend him, and transcendental opulences standing in rows before him. Sri Vasudev, Balaram, Akrura, and others sat to his right, each on his own seat, Gada and Satyaki to his left, and just before him, King Ugrasena. Also nearby was the Lord's minister Vikadru with Kritavarma and several other prominent Vrishnis. Sri Narada was entertaining the Lord, making him smile with clever words, fine singing, and the music of his veena. Sri Garuda stood before the Lord, glorifying him with prayers. And Uddhava massaged the Lord's lotus feet and pleased him with affectionate, intimate remarks. I'll just read this part, it's really cool. As Krishna's dearest friend in Dwarka, Uddhava has the privilege of massaging the Lord's feet in the Sudharma assembly hall. Being so close to the Lord, he can say things that others present should not overhear. He is also a disciple of Brihaspati, the master of speech. So he is a perfect scholar and Krishna's favorite advisor. Even if someone were to stand close enough to hear what he was telling Krishna, his speech was so circumspect that its confidential gist was beyond guessing. Although the Lord to whom Uddhava was speaking had submitted himself to Uddhava's influence, that Lord was Nijeshwaram, the supreme controller. What to speak of being most clever and resourceful. Seeing from a distance the goal I had long desired to see, I fell unconscious, overburdened by love. Then the Lord, brimming with the exalted rasa of affection, told Uddhava to bring me close. Uddhava quickly came forward, delighted to see me in the dress of a cowherd boy. He carefully lifted me from the ground, brought me back to full awareness, and led me to the Lord's side with both hands. Then the Lord, wanting to lift me up and draw me to his side, placed his feet close to me. And oh, Uddhava, with his own hand, firmly touched my head to those lotus feet. The Lord of my life then stroked me with his lotus hand, as if to cleanse each of my limbs. He took the flute from my hand, looked at it, and, apparently in great distress, silently shed tears. The next moment he asked, "Is all well with you? Is your health good? I hope the place you came from is free from any misfortune." While speaking this way, he again began to feel disturbed, and Uddhava had to calm him. With a gesture, Uddhava indicated to the Lord those present before him in the assembly hall, Vasudeva and the other Yadavas, and many kings and demigods and sages. The purport says Uddhava moved his eyebrows to remind Krishna of the presence, not only of Vasudeva and other Yadus, but also of kings like Yudhisthira, demigods like Indra, and sages like Madhacharya. The Lord opened his lotus eyes and glanced at the people in front of him. With difficulty, he somewhat calmed himself and then got up to enter his inner quarters. Because I had now attained the Lord of my life, for whom I had yearned for so long, I was immersed in an ocean of joy. I had no idea what to say or what to do. As the chief of the Yadus began leaving, the Lord honored them with chiefs, such as pan and sandalwood paste. Holding my joined palms in his right hand, he took me with him as he entered the inner palace with Balaram and Uddhava. The Lord's 16,108 queens happily followed their husband along with their maidservants, and in front of the queens placed their mothers-in-law, Sri Devaki and Rohini. Among the queens were the goddesses Rukmini, Satyabhama, and Jambavati, and Kalindi, and Mitravinda, and Satya, Bhadra, and Lakshmana. The Lord's other queens followed, headed by Rohini, all of them fit in every way to be his consorts and all honored by groups of suitably qualified maidservants. With his two mothers and all these queens surrounding him shyly, the Lord entered his palace, followed also by several groups of young sons who added to the splendor of that procession. Within his palace, he concealed the emotions he was feeling, and with apparent pleasure, he sat down on the best of thrones. But I saw the Lord appearing before me as if adorned by the company of the Yashoda and all the beautiful young gopis and many young cowherd boys. Seeing the object of my meditation, holding my flute in his hand, I again fainted, overwhelmed by delight. Then Nandana himself, his mind moved by abundant compassion, quickly got up, and by the powerful touch of his lotus hand, he brought me back to consciousness and carefully cleaned the limbs of my body. It was now lunchtime, but the Lord didn't feel like eating. Only at the insistence of his mothers did he perform his noontime duties. And the commentary says, the pain of separation Krishna felt from remembering Gokula spoiled his appetite. But his mothers, not only Devaki, but also Vasudeva's several other wives, wouldn't let him go without eating. First, however, he took his noontime bath and performed his other normal duties. That darling son of Devaki fed me something with his own hand, and only then took something himself for my satisfaction. The Lord sat his elder brother down within a circle of boys and fed them, just as he had before in his childhood pastime. In the middle of the circle of young Yadus sat Lord Balaram, like a whirl of a lotus in bloom. Previously, Krishna and Balaram had enjoyed noon meals like this in Vrindavan in the company of the cowherd boys, amid clever conversation and laughter. And then it's quoting the description from the 10th canto. In this portrait of the 10th canto, Krishna eats with his friends instead of serving the meal, because on this day, his elder brother Balaram is not present. So that's the beginning of the Brahma Vimohala Leela. I think it was Balaram's birthday. That's why he wasn't there. And that's why Krishna's not feeding them. He's actually eating with them. Uddhava knew the Lord's ecstasies very well, so he ate some of Krishna's Mahaprasad remnants and then took me somewhat by force to his own house. Only then did I completely return to normal consciousness, reflecting on what I had seen happen. I danced for a long time and then began to think. I said to myself, indeed, today I have achieved the ultimate perfection of all my desires. For with my very eyes, I have seen the hero of Raj with all his attractive charms, that same person upon whom I have always meditated in my heart. The next day I went with Uddhava and saw my Lord, but I was so beside myself with delight that I was unable to do more than that. So in the purport it says, on the second day, Gopakumar was still so disorientated by the ecstasy of the new state of affairs that he was unable to render any service other than taking darshan of Krishna. While residing there in Dwarka, I constantly, abundantly received Lord Krishna's wonderful mercy. I tasted such a flood of supreme ecstasy that no one could tell of it in words, or even think of it within the mind, not even a pure devotee of the Lord with a lifetime of Brahma. And one last thing I want to share that I forgot. Yeah, in the purport where it said about Krishna lifting Gopakumar because he had fallen unconscious, it says, though he be a powerful prince in Dwarka, Krishna is always the same Nandana, the darling son of Nanda Maharaj and all the cowherds of Raj. His prime concern is always to keep the devotees of Raj happy. Therefore, he could not help but feel anxious for Gopakumar. Although he could have brought Gopakumar back to consciousness simply by his omnipotent desire, Krishna wanted to take personal care of him. So this is the Lord that we're trying to develop love for. So caring, so attractive, so amazing. And yeah, I guess the key is to be absorbed in Krishna, in his kindness, and just trying to reciprocate with that kindness a little bit by serving him. And in that way, we can have transcendental vision and see the reality that the pure devotees see. Just everything is paraphernalia for serving Krishna. All the devotees are very dear to Krishna. Yeah. And everyone's a devotee, every living entity, even if they've forgotten. Right. Any questions or comments or realizations you'd like to share? Thank you for listening attentively. Shri Bhagavatam ki, Shri Prabhupada ki.